My friends teased him, saying he was weak and that he should watch me in the corner until he stood up. My boyfriend of 8 years left me because of my friends. Maybe not because of them alone. I have most of the fault, and I now realize the importance of keeping your mouth shut about certain things, even around the people you think you trust. It has caused me problems, and I really need your advice on how to get my boyfriend back. My friends playfully teased him, calling him weak and saying he should watch me in the corner until he stood up and left. He hasn't shown up since then and won't pick up my calls or reply to my texts. I really love him and I really don't want to lose him. Let me explain exactly how it happened. First, I'll introduce myself. Hi, I'm Adeline, I'm a model, I'm 27, I'll be 28 in 2 months, and I really hope he'll be back soon, so I'm not using the past tense. I have a boyfriend, Nick, who is only slightly older than me. We've been together for 8 years, and now our relationship is at a point where I'm afraid things might not go back to the way they once were. I met Nick at one of my photo shoots, where I was the model and Nick was the director of the company I was contracted to model for. According to him, when he first saw me, he liked me. I guess you could say it was love at first sight for Nick. When I first saw him, I liked him too, but I was too scared to get involved with him to avoid gossip about favoritism. I knew that those kinds of talks could ruin a model's career, probably for life. But eventually we started dating in secret. It took us 2 years to start dating openly. I remember I had posted a picture on the internet using my nickname. I've used my real name here, which I don't use on my work account, so most of you probably won't know who it is. It's Nick and me holding hands and laughing. I'd tagged the post 2 blissful years with you already. The internet had taken a hit that day because people kept coming at Nick and me, especially me. Some congratulated us and others tried to backlash us. I still had the impression that I was probably with Nick to boost my career, but by that point, I was really concerned with what they thought. I had posted that picture of us to prove to Nick that I was in love with him and no one else. Some things had happened before I posted that picture to clear any doubts Nick had about us. Because of my line of work, I had worked with different models, particularly guys. I was the model for Nick's multiverse company, which produced different products. I was employed to be the model for each one of them, so I had to work with others too. I mean, models like myself. Nick had never wanted to hide our relationship because, in his view, I wasn't a secret he had to keep. However, I had asked him to keep quiet about our relationship, so he respected my wishes. This meant that whenever he saw all those male models getting chummy with me, he got anxious. This was especially the case because I didn't just work with their company. Sometimes I had to travel for work, and that made Nick anxious. It wasn't because he was jealous or didn't trust me. It was because, to the world, I was single. That made anyone seeing me with someone else think it was normal. It bothered him. A month before our 2nd anniversary, someone posted a picture on the internet. It was of a male model I worked with and me laughing. He was holding my waist when the picture was taken. To someone who didn't know us, it probably looked like we were lovers sharing a private moment. But what had actually happened was that he was teaching me to strike that pose for our next photo shoot. We were supposed to pose as a couple in love. But the person who had taken the picture made it look like we were actually lovers and then posted it. I had still been out of town when the whole thing happened. I worked all day and kept my phone with me because I got distracted easily. I didn't know Nick had called several times until I was done with work. I noticed he'd called and called him back, but he didn't pick up. That's when I found out the pictures were going viral and my phone was blowing up with messages from different people. I knew then how Nick felt. Even though I was able to reassure him that it was nothing and the rumors had died down when the company we worked for posted the professional pictures we took, people still somehow believed that there really was something going on between the model and me. So I decided to officially announce our relationship and posted that picture. It took months before people finally began to accept my relationship with Nick and started even to support him. After the whole internet thing, Nick actually wanted to get married. He'd even bought me a ring. I found out because Nick was really careless with keeping his things hidden, especially around me. When I noticed the ring, I knew he was planning on proposing to me. Our conversations at that time had always been about marriage, so after I discovered the ring, whenever Nick talked about the future, I would either ignore what he said or change the topic. I would even sometimes say things like, "I don't believe in marriage," or, "Living in the moment is the best." I loved Nick, and if I were to get married, I would definitely marry him. However, I was scared about marriage because of my parents. You see, my parents were very much in love and didn't care for anyone else. My parents were always on the move because they were always looking for something new. Despite their love for each other, they never had a good conversation outside the bedroom. They were always fighting and arguing. I found out that was because my mom got pregnant with me and she was forced to marry my dad. They had a shotgun wedding and didn't really get to know each other. So, they'd be here, then argue, have a lot of sex, argue again. And then they decided that the environment wasn't good for them, so they moved again. I was their child, so I had no choice but to go along with them everywhere they went. The cycle continued, so I wasn't exactly a settled child. My parents never cheated on each other, though, because they did love each other. I somehow believed that their relationship was weird because they didn't get to know each other well enough. I also thought that maybe love wasn't enough. As a child, I moved around a lot, so I never got to really have any friends. I always wished I had a sibling or a friend to play with, but eventually I grew up believing it wasn't important. Well, that was until I discovered I was only just hiding my desire to actually have true friends. That definitely made me choose the wrong sets of friends. I did have good rapport with my colleagues, though. I got on well with my colleagues and anyone I had to work with, but I kept my distance because I felt like I was a child again. If I made any connections, I would have to move again. Even Nick, before he was able to get through to me, had a hard time breaking through all my insecurities and getting me to actually feel settled. I still believed that marriage would mess up our stable relationship and I didn't want that. I discouraged Nick from talking about marriage until he eventually stopped. I was relieved when I realized that he had got rid of the ring. We continued dating for years. My career was at its peak. Everything was going well for us, until I met some friends of Courtney and Ellie. They were at a party I was invited to by a colleague. We worked together on a project and when we finished, she asked me to come to her party. She said I was celebrating the end of a successful project, but I tried to refuse the offer. She kept insisting, so I had no choice but to say yes. I went to the party in hopes that I would just show up, smile a little, say hi to the host, and leave. But when I got to the party, it was a different experience than I had expected. I'd expected it to be a small, low-key gathering with soft music and people chatting or dancing. Instead, it was loud and full of people, and it seemed like everyone was on drugs. I knew I had to leave fast before I was implicated in being at a party like that. I went to the restroom to take care of business before leaving. I heard two girls talking about the party they were regretting going to. It seemed like the host, who had forced the invite on me, had done the same for them. I came out and sympathized with them, telling them it was the same with me too. The funny thing is, I never interfere. I loved being by myself or just being with Nick, so I didn't try to talk to people unless it was about work. When I did talk to those girls, they hadn't behaved like I had, so I was really happy we introduced ourselves. We also exchanged contact details before leaving the party. Courtney and Ellie had been friends before I came into the picture, so I was like an addition to the group. We started hanging out a lot and did all sorts of things together, like shopping, going to the spa, dining in fine restaurants, and even going on trips. I sponsored most of the things we did. At the time, I didn't mind because I had the money and Nick was happy that I was making friends. Looking back, I realized that I was being foolish. I was spending a lot of money without getting much in return. In some relationships, that would have been a problem, but I didn't notice that with Nick and the girls. I was excited because I finally had my own group of friends. Nick would complain that I spent too much money, especially on the girls, but I wasn't always listening. Sometimes we even fought about it. Courtney worked as a teaching assistant, while Ellie was between jobs, so they earned very little compared to me. I was happy to spend, even though I knew I wasn't being appreciated. I told them everything that went on in my life, including my relationship. I told them about my job offers, and they would give me their opinions. Tell me which one I should accept or reject. I did as they told me. I thought of them as my best friends, the friends I never had while I was still a kid. One time Nick and I had a huge argument about the girls. I had angrily left his place and gone to theirs. Nick tried contacting me for 3 days, but I refused to speak to him until. It was the weekend we had planned to go over to my parents' place, so I had to go back to Nick's place so we could go together to my parents' place. Mind you, it was my parents' temporary place. They were still with the itchy feet as always, so they had come to where I stayed with the purpose of seeing me before they moved again. I'd planned to introduce Nick to them and had already told them, so they'd been expecting us that day. When Nick and I got there, it was like I didn't even exist to my parents anymore because they loved Nick and just ignored me throughout the visit. When we went back home, Nick apologized and I forgave him. He never complained about my friends again, which I was happy about. Nick had to travel for work and it took him 2 months to come back. I missed him, but I had to stay put, so I spent my time exploring and going to parties with Courtney and Ellie every weekend. We went to almost any party that invited us. We partied pretty hard, but I was smart enough not to ruin my reputation by getting drunk and messing things up. Courtney and Ellie didn't mind. They would drink so much and even do drugs that I had to be the one to find a way of taking them home safely. I considered myself lucky because they lived in it was the same place, so it wasn't too difficult to get them there when Nick came back from his trip. They had this annual party for 1+1, so of course Nick had invited me to come along. I went because it would be a great chance to interact with people. I also met Sam, who was a friend of Nick's. He worked in a different company and had been invited to the party to represent his company. Nick had introduced me to Sam, and it was clear that he was interested in me. We chatted for the rest of the party. He was really flirty with me, which annoyed Nick, but there was nothing he could do about it because it was a work party. Then he had to leave my side a few times that evening to talk to some investors, and Sam was the one keeping me company for most of the night. He made me laugh with some hilarious jokes and I enjoyed his company, even though I knew he was interested in me. When it was time to leave, Nick was really annoyed. He snapped at me once while we were driving home, which made me really angry because I hadn't asked to be taken to the party in the first place. He apologized the next morning, though, and even had flowers delivered. He gave me a small box of jewelry in the afternoon. When I opened it, I found a bracelet with a tiny heart on it. We continued being happy even though I knew that Nick was not comfortable with my friends. I still did not mind and he never complained since the last time we argued about it, our 7th-year anniversary. I missed it because I had to travel for work, and Nick and I had planned to go on a trip together. He'd even applied for leave at work because of it. I thought I was free, but that was until an ad agency contacted me to model face products for a company. I had to travel to the headquarters to sign the contract. My agent saw it as a great opportunity and wanted me to accept it. It was a great opportunity, and they really wanted me to accept it, so I did. I was told to leave the next day, and when I told Nick about it, he was happy for me but sad that I had to cancel our trip. I left the next day and arrived early, so I was able to go to the company and sign the deal. It was supposed to be a 3, we met with another model I was supposed to work with on a particular product. The model was actually a male model, which was a surprise. I'd worked with male models before, but I'd never been interested in them. This one was different. His name is Cole. He's quite tall and has that physique that could make him pass for a Greek god. He's very handsome and has a cheeky grin. He seemed to bring out his dimples, making him all the more adorable. I said I had never been attracted to someone the way I had been with Cole. I had sensed trouble right from the moment I met him. I should have just trusted my instincts with Cole and stayed away, but it was almost impossible because somehow he had managed to be in every path of mine throughout those 3 weeks. Nick was definitely handsome. In fact, in terms of looks, he was finer than Cole. But Cole had that certain something. He had a physique that girls would drool over. I guess that was why everyone we worked with seemed interested in him, but he made it obvious that he was interested in me, which made my work life difficult. Others kind of gave me a hard time because of that. Believe me, I tried hard to stay away from Cole, but the more I tried, the more he wanted to get close to me. Cole would purposely stay behind after work so I could get changed, and he could use that opportunity to have a word. Sometimes he'd come to my hotel room, saying we'd work together and that he wanted to go together. The crazy thing was, even though I shouldn't, I enjoyed the attention. I liked the way he looked at me and would stare like I was the only person in the room. The way he'd wink at me playfully and wait for me after work so he could have dinner with me made it easy to like him, and that made me feel guilty. I knew I shouldn't, but I enjoyed the attention. I liked the way he looked at me and would wink at me playfully. He was waiting for me after work, so I felt guilty. Nick called me every night and listened to me talk about my day. When we were about to end the call, he'd tell me he couldn't wait to see me again. I knew I loved Nick and that the feelings I had for Cole were just fleeting. I wanted to enjoy that moment. 3 days before work ended, Cole he took me out to dinner again, as he usually did. It was sweet, as usual. When he walked me to my hotel room, he kissed me. I was so shocked, I didn't return the kiss or push him away. It was after he pecked me on the lips and wished me good night before he left. I knew then I had to tell Cole to back off because I was in a relationship. It was a tough choice, but the right one. I had planned that. I decided I'd tell him the next day either before we started work or after. But that day we were snowed under with work, as it was the last days we had to perfect everything, so I didn't get a chance to talk to him. The same thing happened the next day, so we were only free on the last day. When he asked to take me to dinner, I didn't object because I felt it was my chance to finally tell him what I wanted. I'd been expecting that we were going to I thought we'd go to the same restaurant we ate at nearly every night before that day, or maybe some fancy new place he'd discovered. But surprisingly, Cole invited me to join him in his hotel room and ordered for us from the hotel's kitchen when our food arrived. When we'd finished eating, Cole took out the bottle of champagne he'd ordered with the food and toasted to us. He said he was pleased we'd done a good job. I told him I had something to tell him and that I had a 7-year relationship. After a year together, I told him that things couldn't progress between us. He was surprisingly accepting, but he wanted me to take the drink anyway, to celebrate the end of our professional relationship. I took the drink and we spoke randomly and made lots of jokes and laughed, talking about funny things that happened while we were working. I was already tipsy before I even realized. I drank 2 glasses of champagne and I was a light drunk, so I stood up to excuse myself so I could go to bed early. When Cole noticed I was tipsy, he came around to help me, but we ended up kissing. I don't even know who initiated it. But by the time morning came and the alcohol had left my system, I was in bed with Cole, also naked under the duvet. It was easy to guess what must have happened, and I started panicking. I picked my clothes and put them on quickly while trying not to wake Cole. I left his room and went to mine, showered, packed my bags, and went straight to the airport. I felt like it was probably the last time we'd see each other. We were going to be meeting, so there was no need to talk to Cole or dwell on what had happened between us when I got home. I didn't mention anything to Nick in case I slipped up and told him what I'd done. I felt guilty and at the same time, I felt good about what had happened between Cole and me. I didn't remember most of what had happened as I'd been tipsy, but I just felt good about it. When I went to my friend's place, I told them everything that happened between Cole and me. Instead of scolding me and telling me I did the wrong thing, they were excited on my behalf and asked me to tell them every detail. They made me feel good and proud of what I did, even though my subconscious processed it differently. I felt like there was no need to feel guilty because it was a one-time thing. It was just a time thing and Nick didn't even know about it. I mean, what he didn't know couldn't harm him. Those were my friend's words. Well, I thought I would never have to cross paths again with Cole, but that was clearly my own very clouded judgment because I did cross paths with him again. This time it was Nick's company employing us both, Cole and I, to model for them. The last work we did together was. We ended up getting a lot of attention and a lot of companies wanted us to work with them, but I decided to work with Nick's company. Nick had found out that I was working for Nick's company and he decided to accept the same offer from that company. I was really surprised when I found out and it worried me because I knew that if Nick found out I'd been unfaithful to him, I really hope he doesn't hold it against me. I tried to avoid Cole as much as I could, except when we were working. He tried to get me to talk to him privately, but I kept avoiding him because I didn't want anyone to suspect us together, especially because most of them knew I was with Nick. Cole wouldn't just give up though. He kept trying to get me to talk to him until one day he sent me a text and asked. He said he'd go straight to Nick and tell him about us if I didn't come see him at his rented apartment. I was scared, so I called him to ask for his address, which he'd sent me. I went to his place and pleaded with him not to tell Nick. Cole said I had to keep sleeping with him and nobody had to know. I had no choice but to accept because I thought it was my only option. Then I knew how Nick felt about cheating. His parents were the epitome of true love. They loved each other so much and they hated anyone who tried to cheat on their partners. That belief was passed down to Nick whenever we heard some news about a couple cheating on each other. He would complain about their disgusting attitude. He had a very negative attitude towards cheating and would never be with someone who thinks it's okay to cheat. So, I knew I couldn't afford for Nick to find out about what was going on between Cole and me. We started sleeping together again, which was really tiring, especially because I had to sneak around all the time because I didn't want people to see us together. Also, because of Nick, I changed the lock on my phone because he knew the old one, so that when Cole texted me, Nick wouldn't see the texts. I told Ellie about it one day. I hadn't told them before that Cole and I had been working together and were also sleeping together. When I did confide in her and ask for her advice, she was excited I was seeing Cole again. She told me to dump Nick because he was the one stressing her out. She said she'd never want to hide a relationship with a sexy Greek god, but I still couldn't agree. I loved Nick despite everything and I really wanted to be with him, not Cole. Cole might have been hot, but he was not settled. He wanted something casual and was certainly not a homebody. I know that I was the one for him. I knew that Nick wasn't going to settle down with me because he was a family man and I knew he wouldn't cheat or have itchy feet like my parents. I was only sexually attracted to Cole and that was all. If I'd got serious with him, it would have ended up like my parents on Nick's and my anniversary. I decided to invite our families over and also my friends to celebrate with us that day. I was planning on asking Nick to marry me. I was ready to be a wife. I thought in my head that if Cole knew about my engagement, he'd leave me alone. I know it was a bit silly, but it was the only thing I could think of. I'd planned that later that evening, once everyone had gone, I told Nick we should get married. I was actually really excited. I'd cleaned, cooked and done everything, and I was just setting up the table when everyone started arriving. Despite Nick and my friends not getting along well, they managed to get along through the lunch, which was really nice. Soon enough, my parents had to leave to catch their flight, and then Nick's parents too, because they were visiting his aunt who had been sick. The only people left were my friends, Nick and I, and Nick decided to help me with clearing up the plates, while I chatted to my friends. I wasn't bothered, but Nick was clearly annoyed that they didn't even offer to help. Then Nick's parents had to leave because they were visiting his aunt, who was unwell. The only people left were my friends, Nick and I, and Nick decided to help me clear up the plates, while Courtney and Ellie chatted and drank their drinks. I wasn't bothered, but Nick seemed annoyed that they didn't even offer to help. And he'd said they should leave after they'd finished their drinks. Courtney and Ellie got angry and then started to say some hurtful things when I tried to calm the situation, especially when they started to compare Nick to Cole. They didn't listen and started to playfully mock Nick, saying he was weak. Nick suggested I just sit in the corner like I usually do and watch. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood up and left. I tried calling Nick, but he wasn't picking up. I was really upset with them, so I asked them to leave. They left, but it's been 3 days now, and Nick hasn't called or come back. I'm really scared. Has he figured out that I was cheating on him because of what Courtney and Ellie said, or was it because I had stood there and watched them insult him? Please guys, I really, really love Nick. I cannot lose him. How can I get him back? Update, hello Reddit, I'm really struggling to cope with everything that's going on. I'm tired of reading your comments and seeing how much you hate me. It's just too much. I feel like the world is moving on without me in it. I feel so awful. I've cried myself to sleep many times. I don't know how to get through this. Your words and backlash have killed every bit of self I used to have confidence that I could ever get Nick to forgive me. Now, I feel like I'll be lucky if he ever even considers greeting me from afar. I feel so stupid and used. Used by my so-called friends. I've also been contacted by Cole. While we're on the subject of Cole, his career has been ruined. He's probably rotting in jail because he was accused of sexual harassment by a very popular model. I'm not going to tell Nick that I had an affair. There's no relationship to protect anymore. I feel so heartbroken and stupid. Nick was one person I should never have played with. He was the stability I have always craved. He was the home I have always wanted. I found him and I still lost him, even though I knew it was a mistake. What's worse is that I have no one to talk to about it. Maybe you guys will listen, but you don't like me much, so I'm very lonely. I'll always regret losing Nick. I wish I had married him and had his baby. Maybe I would have stopped modeling by then and never have met Cole. Maybe I'd have our second child now. I've always wanted to have 3 kids with Nick, but now that's not going to happen. Oh, it can never happen again. That thought alone is so painful. I can't help but get teary as I write this down. I still wonder how stupid I was to have thought I could get away with hurting Nick. How stupid I was to think that Courtney and Ellie were good friends and wanted the best for me. They ruined my life. Actually, I did that myself. If I had just listened to Nick and stayed far away from them, perhaps now I would still be happily dating Nick. But then again, I really did shoot myself in the foot. I miss Nick so much sometimes that I send him texts, hoping he'll reply. I'd even settle for a dot or an emoji. Maybe he'd get angry and tell me what he thinks. But that never happened. He never even reads my texts. His company found out about our breakup and broke their contract with me. They offered to pay the contract-breaking fee, but I refused. I wanted to keep working with them so I could see Nick, but they took that away from me too. I guess it's true what they say about not being able to have your cake and eat it. I've had my cake and now I can't have it. I'm absolutely nothing to myself again. I can't even fully express how I feel right now. I feel so empty, and even this emptiness hurts. I don't know how emptiness could hurt, but this one does. I wish I hadn't done the things I did. I really hurt Nick, but life doesn't give us second chances, does it? It's so sad how one minute I had everything I could ever have dreamed of having, without any stress. I had a man that loved me so much and I had my career at its peak, and then one minute everything is gone, with no way of going back or getting it back again. Update: hello, this is my very last post here, and I just wanted to say thank you. You guys were the only people I could talk to about my feelings, even though you weren't very welcoming and you gave me a hard time, but it's better than the silence I've had around me for the past 4 months. I'll just say 2 things to you: don't make the same mistakes I did, and you're lucky to have someone with you, especially when you feel lonely. I'd do anything right now to have someone with me, especially Nick. Thanks, and goodbye.